your thoughts on The Brutalist since you finally got to see it?
Oh yeah, well first of all, I mean when that first, I think I texted you this, but yeah, like that first half like just flew by. I was like, okay, for a movie where there's not any action happening, like this is just really, really compelling stuff. But yeah, I mean I kind of blew, I mean I knew it was going to be good, but yeah, it was, it's special, I think. Like it's the performances are all so good. I mean Felicity Jones just being in the second half of the movie. I don't know why she's not getting more.
People are crapping on her performance in the movie. They're saying it holds the second act back.
I couldn't agree less with that. Yeah, I think she's very, very good. I mean, I think Guy Pearce is freaking awesome. Like you said, the shots, the cinematography of it, I mean, just the sets, everything about it is just the detail and just the specificity of all of it. It's extraordinary. I mean, I don't understand, how anyone could crap on just about like anything in that movie, frankly. I mean, it's, I don't know if you saw my Letterboxd review, but yeah, I mean, it's an instant. I think it's an instant classic. Like,
yeah, you called it the first instant classic since Parasite.
Yeah, like when I walk, I was like, "Yep, this is going to be one that like lasts over for I think for a long time."
So I was also just like totally blown back by it, and I feel bad for me that my Letterboxd review was just talking about how Paul Schrader was in my screening coughing without covering his mouth.
Did he get you sick? Did it happen?
No, I'm fine. I mean, I was fine. I was a little sick this week, but I was fine at the time. I don't know if he was sick. He's just kind of gross.
Well, yeah, was he like 70 something? Of course he's gross.
I think he's 78 and he sounds like RFK Jr.
Oh, gross.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's the best movie of 2024 by like not a wide margin. I mean, I think Furiosa and Dune 2 are two of like the best movies that I've seen, but yeah. The Brutalist is just a different thing.
Nobody's making movies like this anymore. I mean, that's like it's completely different from like anything else that's coming out right now.
I have a neighbor who's a filmmaker, and he said the exact same thing when I asked him what he thought. He goes, "There is no one making movies in North America like Brady Corbet. It's just not happening." My response was the only thing that to me even comes close is Tar. You know, that was like a deep, like a really rich movie that drew you in both with how it looked and how it felt and the performances. And this was the same thing on a much grander scale.
Yeah, I was really surprised too. Like I thought Adrian Brody would be a more sympathetic immigrant story. Not at all. Like not even a little bit. Like he's kind of a bad person. Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, and it's not that there's not anything sympathetic about him either. I mean, he certainly has his good qualities as well. But like, I did not realize he was going to be like a drug addict, prostitute. Like a lot of that stuff like surprised me. Like I'm not used to seeing that also in like immigrant stories. Like they don't cover or they don't show that stuff. In a lot of those kind of movies. So just what a performance by him too. It couldn't have been done. I don't know if anyone else could have done it.
I don't know. I'm glad you said that because it makes sense for this story to go this way. He's so post-traumatic that how could he be well-adjusted? It just wouldn't have worked at all.
Went through the camps and everything. Like, I mean, you come out of that normal.
Right. And he's a liar, which I think also makes a lot of sense because what's he had to do to survive? I do love that it does seem like the best actor Oscar is Brody defending his crown as youngest ever winner against Chalamet.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So if Chalamet wins, he'll be the youngest ever person to win this award. Brody is the current record holder of that. And Brody is also nominated, or will also be nominated this year.
Yeah. And it's funny, he hasn't been nominated since doing that either. Like, that's the only time he's ever been nominated before, too.
It's crazy. So last night, while you were watching The Brutalist, I just happened to be watching King of the Hill, the Soderbergh movie, which I knew nothing about, but I'm watching all the Soderbergh movies now. It stars Jesse Bradford, who has devolved as a performer since he was a child. He was a good child actor, but incredible in King of the Hill. But we've reviewed Bring It On, where he's really bad.
Oh, right, that's him. Yeah, I was wondering, like, where have I heard that name? Yeah.
And he's like fine in Hackers. He's good in, where's I going with this? Oh, Adrian Brody shows up as like a 19-year-old kid. It's wild. Really? He looks totally, I mean, it's clearly him, but he looks very, very different even than he did in The Pianist. Yeah, it was just cool. It was cool. I'm like, oh, Jake's seeing The Brutalist, and I'm seeing Adrian Brody pop up as this like scamp. Anyway, King of the Hill is good. It feels kind of cheesy at first, and then it's kind of like a live action Grave of the Fireflies.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, not quite as depressing, but it's about a kid who's kind of on his own in Depression era America. So,
jeez, yeah, heavy.
Yeah. All right, cool. Should we start with? Did you watch Onibaba?
I just finished it this morning. Yeah, like I had like 20 minutes to finish this morning. So yeah, just finished it. Man, we'll talk about it, but fuck, that's a wild movie.
Let's talk about it right now.
Let's talk about Onibaba.
Okay, so anyway, this is Never Did It. Welcome back. I'm Brad Garoon. I'm here with Jake Ziegler. This is a podcast where we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. And today we are talking about Onibaba and Thunderball from the year 1965.
Yep.
Let's start with Onibaba.
Yeah, it's as fresh can be.
It's super fresh. So usually we start with the not as good. I mean, sometimes we talk about two great movies, but when there's one that's not as good, we usually start with it. Not today. Let's flip it. Yeah. So I recommended Onibaba, which I only learned about in the last few months. I mean, I'd heard the name, but I only really knew what it was in the last few months because Willem Dafoe went on the Criterion Closet and called it his favorite movie and said that he once owned the rights to it, but then either couldn't get it made or decided he couldn't do it justice. So anyway.
I actually just read that this morning too, where he said he just didn't think that any modern updates would he thought it would like ruin the story, which I hate that expression, ruin the story. It's like, no, the original would still exist. It wouldn't ruin anything, but I agree it would maybe be hard to do, or, I mean, it's Willem Dafoe. I trust him,
Right. I mean, it would have been interesting and I wouldn't have been mad at it, but I think it would be really hard to improve upon what Kaneto Shindo did with Onibaba. Just because it's so sleek, it's so trimmed down. You're not gonna. I mean, you could add to it, right? You could make it a bigger story, but I don't think that makes it a better story. But in any event, it takes place during a civil war in Japan. All the men are fighting, and so these two women, a woman and her daughter-in-law, they're doing whatever they can to survive, which is primarily made up of killing wayward soldiers and stealing their armor and weapons and selling them for food. Yeah. For like the most basic of food, and then during the day they go get water, and at night and it's so hot. Like this is a real sweaty movie.
Oh, it's like oppressively hot. I mean, it was yeah. I mean, I was uncomfortable during several parts. I'm just like, oh, just thinking about that makes me just I can't handle it.
So the thing that links these two women is that one of them is married to the other's son. That man went off to fight in a war, to get paid to fight in a war, along with their neighbor. The neighbor comes back without the man. He says the man was killed. This guy now, who is played by someone who has never been a part of my viewing experience. His name's Kei Sato, but I have this year alone watched 3 movies he's in.
What are the other 2?
Crazy. The Return of Godzilla, and Harikiri I finally watched, which is another just like incredible movie. He's in both of those, and he's in this, and he's great in all of them. He's so good. Anyway, he shows up, and now that this girl is a widow, he wants her, but the mother-in-law still wants her because how will she survive on her own? She can't run this scheme of hers, killing soldiers.
Yeah, she can't do that. She can't murder on her own. I mean, literally, I think that's what she says. Like, I cannot kill these people on my own, or something. Yeah, I mean, she needs help murdering.
Right. So it's a really small drama just about these 3 people and who is going to survive in a time when it seems like very few people are surviving. Anyway, I watched it a couple of months ago. I was like, oh, this is one of the best movies I've ever seen. What did you think of Onibaba?
Well, I don't know if it's one of the best movies I've ever seen, but I think it's awesome. It's so different, and I think about a lot of the movies that I know from the 60s, and I looked at my 60s list, I'm like, gosh, it's pretty light, actually. I need to probably view more movies from the 60s, but...
That's why we do this podcast.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I'm learning more and more every week. But even just compared to, like, I looked at my 1965 list. Like, I've seen The Sound of Music and I've seen Thunderball, and that's why I recommended Thunderball for you. But just compared to any of the other movies, it seemed like it's such a wild, like, indie movie aesthetic. Like, at a time where maybe I just don't know about that many movies, but it felt totally different. It was totally surprising to me in a lot of ways because, like I didn't know a whole lot about it. I was familiar with the title, the way you're familiar with a lot of titles maybe that you haven't seen, but like Onibaba. Oh yeah, that's supposed to be good, right? But yeah, I didn't know anything about it. Saw the mask, because you kind of see that in a lot of the advertising things. So I was like, okay, well that's real creepy looking, but yeah, I didn't know how it was going to play out. Like I didn't know if it was, if the person in the mask was like, a main character in this or whatever, or if that was like, something tormenting. Like I had no idea, so it came into it completely fresh. Knew nothing about it, and after seeing it and knowing that Willem Dafoe was in it, I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I can see him. I can see Willem Dafoe like playing the returning soldier. Maybe not now. I mean, he might be a little bit old. He's a little bit old for it now.
Well, what difference does it make? Oh, the returning soldier. See, I was thinking he could play the samurai.
Oh, yeah.
Because why not? He's behind a mask. It's like it's a very ethereal role. So we didn't mention this, and this is kind of spoilers for what is essentially an experiment of a movie that you can sum up very easily. But eventually, this samurai wearing a mask, and if you Google Onibaba, you'll see the mask come up right away, demands that the mother-in-law direct him to a town or something, I can't remember, and she's afraid that he's going to kill her as soon as her usefulness to him is done. And a big part of her scheme for killing is this big hole, this big pit.
The pit.
They show in the beginning of the movie. And she lures him to the pit, and then she removes his mask and wears the mask as a way of scaring her daughter-in-law into thinking that being with the neighbor is a bad idea. Is like something that the ghosts of either the ghost of her ex or just in general, the spirits don't want it.
Well, because that's all they want to do. Hachi and the dog, they just want to bang like all the time. Like they're just constantly trying to bang in the reeds and everything where it's real like gross and stuff. But you know, I mean, what else are they going to do?
Well, what I love about this movie is it just shows that when you lose everything, all there is left to do is satisfy your base urges. So when they eat, they're like gobbling up the food so fast. And when they have sex,
comes back and when he's eating for a second, like I almost had to pause. I'm like, this is just disgusting. I can't listen to this.
Yeah, if you have misophonia, put it on mute because it's gross. And then when they bang like crazy. So like all they're doing is satisfying their most, and then they're killing, obviously. So they're just satisfying their most base of urges. Yeah, I could totally see Defoe playing this sort of like ghostly samurai who comes back and then ends up giving her this mask, which is cursed. So that's cool. And then you mentioned the reeds. That's like a huge motif for the movie is the blowing reeds at night. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's such a scary visual to see that too, because like that's the kind of thing you could get yourself lost in. And what's scarier than like being lost in a place that you can't find your way out, you know, and where there may or may not be a demon coming after you. I mean, it's a really cool visual.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that way, like lost in a place where you can't find your way out, because the whole movie just takes place between these two huts, you know, the neighbor's hut and their hut. But in between is a lot of space. It feels like a lot of space, but it's clearly not. And and people who go in there don't come out, and it turns, and you know, they're talking throughout the movie about these legends of like this spirit or that spirit that's mad at you for this or that, but they're the monster. It's very like The Village, like M. Night Shyamalan kind of just told in so much more of an efficient way.
Less gaga around it. It's just it's very simple, it's very bare bones, but I think it's most effective that way.
Yeah, it's funny. You said, you know, you don't think about 60s movies this way. I guess I don't either, because I think about now when sometimes I'll watch a movie like The Killer, like Fincher's The Killer, where it kind of feels like, oh, that's he had a thought and he fleshed it out a little bit, but it's a very efficient script. It almost feels like an experiment. And that's something that happens now when the access to making movies is easier. I was talking about Soderbergh earlier. Like he's making movies on iPhones. They're not his best movies, but he's making. Or like 28 Years Later is about to come out. That was filmed on an iPhone, which just based on the trailer is crazy. Yeah,
that a movie that big was filmed on like entirely or just partially?
Entirely, but like with all of these bells and whistles attached to the iPhone.
That is news to me. I did not know that.
I'll send you an image of the phone and like the contraption around it, and you're like, is it even really being filmed on an iPhone anymore at this point?
I wonder why he chose to do that. But that's a question for another time. Yeah,
I don't know, but yeah, you don't think about movies from the 60s being like that, but the masters in Japan kind of were doing stuff like this. I mean, there's this, and like I mentioned, I just watched Harakiri, which is currently ranked the #1 movie on Letterboxd.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not an experiment. I mean, it has like a bit of it, I wouldn't say an epic scope. You know, it has like a bit of the Kurosawa vibe to it, just in that it's a Chanbara, well, sort of like an anti-Chanbara movie. Like it's a samurai movie about how crap samurai are. So is Onibaba.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the samurai are I mean, they're easily killed by, two small women, you know, just because, well, obviously they're not expecting to be killed. They're not on their guard or whatever. And that's why the women are able to kill so many of them.
Right. Well, they're also trying to, in a lot of cases, kill each other. And while they're trying to do that, the women attack.
Like where those two are in the water, like fighting each other. Then I mean, what a cool, like, brutal scene to watch.
Yeah. It's cool because it comments on a lot of things. I mean, what I love about movies like this, or any movie that's left a little ambiguous or a little more even just like artsy fartsy, is you can project a lot of what you want onto it. And I think that that's a cool thing that movies do. This movie is about the futility of war. I've read that the scars on the supposedly beautiful samurai's face that turns out to be disgusting was a commentary on like burns from Hiroshima. It does seem like a large portion of Japanese cinema is commenting on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah, it's just like a lot of really cool, and then just like the relationship between women when it comes to men, and just what we do when we lose everything. Just a very cool movie. I love it so much, and I was and it's I keep saying efficient. It's so short. It's just so easy to get through.
Yeah, it's like an hour 40, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not long or anything, but it gets going right away. I mean, I think they commit their first murder within like the first 2 or 3 minutes or something. I mean, it gets started right away, and the efficiency of just having those 3 characters. I mean, obviously a few other bodies basically come and go, and that's about it. I mean, it's really just told between these 3 characters and how they relate to each other. And even the woman the older woman, the mother-in-law, she's just so desperate. She's doing anything she can. I mean, she offers herself to the soldier, who of course, he has no interest in that because he has access to the younger one already. So I think that kind of sets her off in a way too, down towards the demon path she ends up going on.
Yeah, it's funny. She was, I think, like in her she was our age, and they were calling her an old hag.
Yeah, jeez, that's ridiculous.
Yep.
Yeah, the only thing they did to older, like the gray streak in her hair.
Mm-hmm. Anything else on Onibaba?
Just easy to recommend, though. I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, like, it was on Criterion. It was easy enough to find, but it's probably different than maybe a lot of the Japanese movies that a lot of us have seen. Anyway.
I've seen it categorized as a horror movie. I don't think I agree with that.
No, I wouldn't call it a horror movie either. I mean, I think that gets, obviously just because of the demon and the mask and everything, I think it's easy just to call it that. And maybe there are some elements of that, but overall, no, I would not call it a horror movie either.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't fit into one easy category.
Okay, you know what movie wasn't so short, and I found very unpleasurable to watch? Was Thunderball, which we've already covered on this podcast, sort of, because we watched. You keep doing this to me,
and I wouldn't if I had seen more movies. So that's I'm glad we're doing this podcast, so I can have seen more movies. But yeah, it's literally because it was the only choice. I mean, if you hadn't seen Sound of Music, we could have watched Sound of Music, but you had already seen it.
I've seen it. I enjoy it. So now I've seen Thunderball, which I didn't find. Okay, on the bright side, Never Say Never Again is like said to be a remake of Thunderball. It's an adaptation of the same source material, but it's different. The plot is different. It's a different thing. I mean, the plot is the same in that there's like a MacGuffin that he has to find, but that's a James Bond movie.
Ever. I mean, yeah.
Right. But I was disappointed because I do like the original trilogy Bond movies. Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger, and this is the next one. Mm-hmm. And it's the first fumble, I think, in large part because so much of it is boring. Like just boring underwater, almost impossible to track fight scenes where like stuff happens and then they'll do a quick close-up on the principal actors who are not really in the scene so that you know that they are the actors, and then back to all the stuntmen, and then a quick close-up and then back to all the stuntmen. It's very hard to track, so it's frustrating by that. But anyway, do you want, real quick, you told us why you recommended it. What is Thunderball about?
Oh gosh, I watched it a week ago already. I mean, what is it? What is it really about? What is any James Bond movie really about? I mean, this follows the pattern of everything. He's Blofeld is the villain, and he's gonna, I don't know, is he gonna blow up the world? No,
Blofeld is there, but
the villain's
Largo is the villain.
Not great.
No.
Blofeld's like the classic Bond villain. I mean, he's the best, but it doesn't focus so much on him. But yeah, there's a plot to blow up the world, and Bond has to save it. I mean, what am I missing here?
Okay, so the plot is not expressly to... hello, Laszlo.
Hi, Laszlo.
The plot is not expressly to blow up the world. The plot is to blackmail the U.S. and the U.K. by stealing 2 atomic bombs, threatening to blow up the world, and getting $100 million, which I also found confusing because earlier in the movie, when Spectre gets together to talk about their financial situation, they're like, we actually need $200 million. Why didn't you ask for $200 million?
I'm halfway there. Maybe if they get 2 atomic bombs, they can threaten one with one, then they get another. I mean,
that's not what they did.
No, not at all.
So this is the movie. I also realized this is the movie that I feel as though Austin Powers is taking most of its material from, because you've got Spectre sitting around the table. Largo is number 2, which is that what's his name's character in Austin Powers, and the guy gets dropped from the conference table into first he gets electrocuted, then he gets dropped into the floor.
Yeah.
So Austin Powers is pulling a lot from Thunderball. The sharks.
They didn't have laser beams, but yeah, definitely the sharks, a lot of underwater.
So that's the whole deal. And Bond is lucky. So I wrote a list of all the things that I hated about this. But one thing I didn't hate, one thing that I hated about Live and Let, or Never Say Never Again, that I didn't hate this, is Tom Jones does the theme for this one, and it's not so bad.
Oh, I like Tom Jones, and I like the theme song.
It's solid, and the fight before the credits is decent. Although, first thing I wrote was, so Bond has to he goes to a funeral of a agent, a Spectre agent that he meets.
Someone he knew too, someone he knew pretty well.
Yeah, he wanted to confirm that this guy was dead, and then it turns out the guy is dressed as his own wife, faked his death. And Bond goes to his house and attacks this woman. Why did he go to his own funeral at all? Why would he put himself in that situation? That really bothered me.
So that there could be a fight scene.
Right. So that fight scene is not bad. It pales in comparison to like the train fight scene in like From Russia with Love.
Oh, that's an all-timer. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's fine. And then immediately the movie gets stupid. So Bond is at this like retreat, getting, healing up. He's got a big bruise on his back from the fight.
Yep.
It just happens to be where Spectre is doing reconstructive surgery on one of their agents to look like a pilot so they can steal these nuclear bombs. But Bond just happening to be there makes Bond seem like a freaking idiot.
Right. Hey, now I wonder, is this where, since this movie came out in 1965, and the big angle on the main event where the Hebner brothers, came out, they're like, and Hogan's doing, who had the plastic surgery? Did Vince finally see Thunderball 20 years later, and was like, we could steal that for an angle, I thought of that actually when they were doing the reconstructive surgery on the face.
So I would say maybe, except for, like you said, there's like a 18-year gap here, or like a 20-year gap here, actually more than 20 years. Also, like a million soap operas came out between the two, where this was surely a well-worn angle.
That's true.
What else? Another thing I'll say in favor of it is two of the most beautiful women to ever live are the evil woman and the good girlfriend of Largo. So that's cool. They're both quite sexy.
Yes.
Largo is the most boring Bond villain I've ever seen. Even more boring than the villain in Never Say Never Again, because he doesn't play a stupid video game against Bond.
This could have used more tabletop. Yeah. More tabletop video games. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just like the underwater stuff is so bad. And the compositing is terrible, but that's true in every Bond movie from like the Connery and Roger Moore Bond movies. One part killed me. So they have at the very end, the boat separates, the boat that has the bomb on it. And so it's a speedboat or whatever. I'm not good with nautical terms.
Yeah, it's a boat.
And it's flying, right? Like they've increased the frame rate like crazy. Everything's happening in fast motion. And there's a part where the composite shot of outside, like the green screened outside shot, is clearly showing them crashing into the atoll, into the reef. But they don't, and then they reuse the same shot later when it does crash into the reef, which just seemed lazy.
Yeah, they're taking some shortcuts.
Yeah, so not my favorite Bond movie, to say the least. My second worst, I think.
Oh, wow. And there's still a handful you haven't seen, though, right?
I think there's there's at least 8 I haven't seen.
Oh, wow. Okay, I thought it was less.
Well, I haven't seen 2 of the Pierce Brosnan ones.
Which ones have you not of his?
I have seen GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies.
Okay. Yeah, those are the two better ones. The other two are worse.
Right, so I haven't seen the other 2.
Obviously GoldenEye. I mean, yeah, everybody likes GoldenEye.
GoldenEye is my favorite Bond movie. I haven't seen Diamonds Are Forever.
That's a good one. Oh, no, that one's okay.
I haven't seen You Only Live Twice. I've seen the opening scene, but I've never seen the whole thing.
Yeah, those two are okay.
I haven't seen The Living Daylights.
Pretty good. Actually, I think the Daltons are a little underrated.
I think Man with a Golden Gun is amazing.
That's not Timothy Dalton's not in that, but...
Oh, you said Dalton. I heard more.
Yeah. Well, the Moors are rated properly. There's some good ones and some real bad ones.
Yeah, there's some really bad. I know you hate this one, but I haven't seen Octopussy.
It's bad, yeah.
I haven't seen For Your Eyes Only.
That's pretty bad, too. Yep.
I haven't seen View to a Kill.
Also real bad. Despite Christopher Walken, it's still bad.
And then the 2 Brosnan ones I mentioned, World Is Not Enough and Die Another Day, I haven't seen. And I've never seen the Peter Sellers, the David Niven. Yeah, yes, Peter Sellers and David Niven. I've never seen the goofy Casino Royale.
It's at some point maybe it's worth seeing just to see, but it's kind of like that first Ocean's 11 movie, like the original like Ocean's 11.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to that. Like just this gigantic cast. I think they got together just to hang, and they're like, I guess we'll put together a movie out of this sort of thing.
Got it.
Not great.
So you're saying I've seen the best Bond movies?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't think there's any major classics that you're missing. Yeah, I mean you've covered cover the good ground. And for me, I like all the Bond movies, even the bad ones, like the ones I say that are bad. Like I just have an affinity for the Bond movies, and I liked Thunderball. Okay, I mean, it's none of the things you're saying about it are untrue, and it's not like particularly well made or anything, and it's not. I remember it being like one of my favorites when I was younger, and maybe that's just because I thought the underwater stuff was neat or whatever. But I mean, yeah, at this point, it's too long, it's kind of incomprehensible, but I still smile through a lot of it, just like smiling uncomfortably maybe too when I realize like, okay, the first sexual assault is within like 10 minutes, and then he blackmails someone, then he threatens her with her job, 10 minutes after that. Like, God, he's a piece of shit. Like, what a scumbag. But,
in his and I'm not trying to defend him, because when you texted me, how long do you think it'll take for the first sexual assault to happen? I didn't realize you were being literal, and I looked at the clock. I'm like, oh, it really is 15 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, because I paused it because I wanted to see, how long did this take? And it was less than 15 minutes.
But in Bond's defense, he had just been tortured by an exercise machine.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, which is a weird... such a weird little scene, but I love all the stuff at the beginning. He talks to M, and he flirts with Moneypenny, and he talks to Q and all that stuff. Like, right. I love all that stuff.
For those who haven't seen Thunderball, Bond is strapped hands and feet into a machine that's just supposed to like stretch him out a little bit, and then one of the villains comes in and increases the frame rate of the filming of the movie, which is how they filmed it, so that Bond is stretched not tighter, just faster.
Yes.
How that was supposed to hurt him, I don't know.
It's like their version of the pit of despair, not to 50,
Right. Yeah, pretty dumb, but I have to talk about, before we wrap up, I have to talk about the dumbest thing that happens in this movie, or the most egregious. Mm-hmm. So Bond has a secretary, not Moneypenny, like his own like assistant spy who's helping him out, Carla, I think her name is.
I think that's right, yeah.
She gets kidnapped, and she takes cyanide during her tortures so that she can't give up any information. Bond and his local, they're in the Bahamas, and his local Bahamian sidekick, you have to have a little like local flavor, is driving him home, and he says, "What do I tell MI6 or MI5?" And Bond says, "Tell them Carla's dead." And the guy just goes, "Okay." You just found out your coworker's dead, but is this the room? What is happening?
Maybe he's just used to it.
Okay. I had to rewind it. I'm like, I heard it wrong. So I gave this 2 stars.
What did I give it? 3 or 3.5? Like I said, I enjoy it despite its many, many flaws. But yeah, it's certainly, after those first 3, like you said, Dr. No, From Fresh with Love, and Goldfinger are all really strong. Thunderball, yeah, not so good.
Not good. Okay, so shall we do our top movies of 1965?
Yeah, I mean, short list for me. Oh, and I will mention, we could refer to Thunderball as the Oscar-winning Thunderball, as it won the Oscar for visual effects that year.
I mean, there are a lot of visual effects.
Yeah, well, let's see what it beat, just out of curiosity here. There were 2 nominees. It was Thunderball and The Greatest Story Ever Told.
The Bible movie?
Yeah, the George Stevens movie about Jesus.
Fascinating.
Which was nominated for 5 Oscars. No, not a Best Picture, but that movie was up for a bunch of Oscars, but it did not win because Thunderball took the Visual Effects Award from it.
Well, bummer for The Greatest Story Ever Told.
And I mean, they're just, been those Hollywood liberal elites just been persecuting Jesus, for so long.
Okay, I have a top 5, but I have to do one cheat. So here's my top 5. Starting with my cheat is the Charlie Brown Christmas special.
Nice.
It's not a feature film, but I watched it, and I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Of all the Charlie Brown holiday specials, I think it's my favorite that I've seen. There's like 15 of these things.
Is that really?
Yeah, there's at least 3 Christmas ones, the New Year's one. There's a couple of Thanksgiving ones. There's 2 Valentine's Day. I mean, there's a bunch of these. They've been doing them for 40 years. So
right, yeah.
My number 4 is a movie called Mirage, an Edward Dmytryk movie starring our favorite guy, Gregory Peck, and Walter Matthau. Gregory Peck gets wrapped up in this conspiracy around. He's an architect who gets wrapped up in a conspiracy and a murder plot. He's framed, and then Walter Matthau is an investigator who tries to help him but ends up getting killed. It's the only movie I can think of where Matthau doesn't play a bad guy but dies. Anyway. Oh no, he dies in his final screen appearance in which is a real bummer because he didn't look well and he died in real life just a few months later in Hanging Up. And then Diane Baker plays the femme, not the femme fatale. She's just a femme, just a lady in the movie. My number 3 is The Sound of Music. So this was directed by Robert Wise and stars famously Julie Andrews as a nun who goes to live with a family in Austria, and then the Nazis get involved and they have to head for the hills.
And sing about it.
It's quite good. My number 2, and this is why you don't have a list, is because you have not seen the Dollars trilogy. My number 2 is for a few dollars more. It's the second in the Dollars trilogy. It's probably the weakest of the 3, but it's very good. It's Sergio Leone and stars Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef. And Lee Van Cleef is just like the meanest motherfucker you've ever seen ever in this movie. Really, really good stuff. All 3 movies, it's like stupid for me to recommend, but all 3 movies are worth watching. I feel like for a few dollars more is probably the least seen also. And then my number 1 is Onibaba, which is just a really cool, very small movie about so many things, most of which is being sweaty and hungry.
And horny. Yeah. Not forget the horny part. Yeah.
All right, cool. We'll be back next week. Actually, before we go, since this was a kind of a short one, I'm going to, because it didn't make the podcast feed. It was a YouTube exclusive, but stay tuned for, I did a review of the Count of Monte Cristo with Brandon Treadway because Jake hasn't seen it yet and I just needed to talk about it. So stick around for that. And then next week, we'll be back with a look at 2006.
As soon as I finished it, I was like, I need more people to watch this. I was like, who wants to go see this? And my brother was like, I'll go. And he loved it.
You're a big Nolan guy, right?
I like Christopher Nolan a lot, yeah.
When I was watching this, I thought, fuck, they're doing like not low rent. There's nothing low rent about the movie. It's huge. But it felt like at times I was watching The Dark Knight Rises, like when he picks up the kid in the prison, the nephew. I was like, oh, he's picking up Robin.
It's so funny you mention this because the first time I watched it, so I guess I totally agree with you 100%. I had never read Count of Monte Cristo. I had never seen any of the other films. I knew nothing about the story. I only knew that it was a revenge movie in some capacity. So when I watched it, I was like slack-jawed the entire time. I'm like, this is the most amazing story I've ever watched. But what I caught that same thing. I was like, this feels like Batman, Robin, and Batgirl.
Yeah.
Like going around and dealing justice through Gotham. And I have to imagine that at least Nolan's Batman is heavily influenced by the Count of Monte Cristo.
Nolan's Batman and like every revenge story for the last 120 years, probably.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, if you think about like the going into the cave and having to, he's self-imposing himself into his own exile. I was impressed by the scope of it, and also the way that the characters or even the camera, us as viewers, feel slightly removed emotionally from the characters, in that like we don't get any interiority because there's not a ton of exposition between the main characters, which I love and is very different. So after I watched this, and we can talk about this in a minute, but I went back and watched 2 other versions of the Count of Monte Cristo. I had never seen them before either, and I was also surprised by the movie as it went. I didn't know the story.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But it turns out it's pretty different for every adaptation, which I appreciated as someone who watched 3 versions of the Count of Monte Cristo this week. This one's far and away the best one, but in like, let's say the 2002 one, it stars Jim Caviezel and Guy Pearce and Richard Harris, who should have been in the whole movie, but he plays Abe Faria, so he dies. Spoiler alert, he dies kind of early. I mean,
spoiler for like a 200-year-old story.
Right. I always want Richard Harris. Like, I watched Gladiator before Gladiator 2 came out, and I was once again upset that Richard Harris wasn't in the entire movie.
He's great.
He's incredible. In the 2002 Count of Monte Cristo, they're explaining everything they feel to one another. Everything's said out loud. And there's not a lot of that in this movie, which is good because I don't speak French. And it's also good because it lets you get immersed in the world more than, it feels less like a play and more like you're just in it. Nolan's movies do this too, where not everything is said out loud on the screen. And in that way, it also kind of reminded me of The Prestige because of the treachery and revenge and trickery of the whole thing, which is really cool. But I saw that you had posted this 4.5-star review on Letterboxd. I didn't want to read it because I wanted to see it. And the reason I wanted to see it is because the French freaked out about this movie when it came out. It had like a 4.4 on Letterboxd for like a year because it came out in France forever ago. Did you know much about the movie? I mean, I know you said it was just a revenge movie, but did you know that it was like well received in France?
I did, yeah. So I had seen it making the rounds in a few different places. It had been playing. Yeah, it had already been out in France. It played a handful of festivals domestically here. And one of my good friends from TikTok had seen it at the Philadelphia Film Festival. And he immediately put it as his #1 film of the year.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, You're playing, dude. So I messaged him. I was like, what is this? Like, are you serious? Like, is it really that good? And he's like, it's really that good. So I was like, well, as soon as I can get my hands on this thing, I'm ready to watch it.
Have you seen Pierre Niney in anything before?
Mm-mm.
We tried watching. There's this show on HBO Max right now that's supposed to be very good. I can't remember what it's called. We got through half an episode. He's funny in it. He's the star. He's big. He's like a big deal.
I watched an interview. I mean, it was in French, so I only got so far. But
Right.
like, it was kind of like a Good Morning America type looking thing. This was my investigation trying to figure out how to say his name. When I say someone's name in a review or a video, I always try and get it as close to as accurate as I can. So I was doing all this YouTube research and I kept coming across French videos and none of them were saying his name. And I was like, okay, clearly this guy's a big enough deal to where everyone knows who he is. But I watched one where he comes out and people were going nuts for this guy. Like, he feels like if I were to kind of compare him to someone that we would have here, he feels almost like, these guys are British, but like an Andrew Garfield, a Robert Pattinson type, where it's like, this guy's been in a lot of stuff. He's a really good actor. He's kind of a certain age group. And like, the older people are like, yeah, this guy can act his ass off. And the younger people are like, he is very hot. I mean.
Well, that's true. It's funny you mentioned that because he spends half the movie with his face covered by a mask, kind of, right? Like
that is my favorite thing in the entire movie. So I'm a massive Mission Impossible fan. Like, love the franchise. When he shows up as like the reverend or father, whatever he is, like the preacher, I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. Like, that kind of took me off guard because it was like the first time we see him like with a mask on. But there was no lead up to him wearing a mask until he's in the church and he's holding a mask. And I paused it. My wife, a lot of times when I watch a movie, my wife will just be kind of sitting on the couch watching or reading a book. And I paused it and I was like, this is the French Mission Impossible. And she was like, what are you talking about? I was like, this movie has the same mask logic as Mission Impossible, that like, if you put on a mask, that's as good as a regular face.
Yep.
And I love that.
So what I like about it most, and I'm going to do a lot of comparing to these other two versions, the 2002 Jim Caviezel and then the 1975 Richard Chamberlain version, which is so funny because after watching them both, it is now clear to me that Jim Caviezel has been molding his career after Richard Chamberlain in like you're not hitting it, my man. But good for you for trying. I mean, I don't think Richard Chamberlain was on the we're going to save the world from pedophilia that may or may not be happening.
He's like, where's his Sound of Freedom movie?
Right. Anyway, in those movies, the big disguise is like white hair or a beard.
Oh, really? Like,
yeah,
that's it?
It's not believable that no one would remember him. In this, at least, he's got a huge-ass jaw to go along with his mask.
Yeah, and he's got kind of like the nose. And I was really impressed by the makeup, just like in general across the board. It's difficult to age someone up. And I think that they took the route of subtlety with the age makeup, and I think that paid huge dividends. The actress who plays Mercedes, she does look like she's 18 or so years older, but like a very beautiful 18 years older.
I feel like they must have digitally de-aged her a little bit in the beginning. She's just
I thought that at the same time. I was like,
perfect, right? In the beginning, she's like a perfect person.
On the second go around, I was watching it for that exact, like, that was one thing I was looking for. And if they did it, I couldn't tell, because I was like, man, she does look so like beautiful when she's young, and then she still looks beautiful when she's older. I was kind of trying to figure out, okay, are they putting the makeup on for everybody in like the second and third act, or are they doing something in the first act to make everyone look younger?
Right.
Because especially the captain that got demoted or fired at the beginning.
Danglar.
Yeah. I was like, he looks like much older.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did they different beard? Like, I don't know. But I'd love to get a Blu-ray to see some behind the scenes for this, because that's a special feature right there.
For sure. I think he might be an older guy or a middle-aged guy who had dye in his beard in the beginning of the movie, and same goes for the prosecutor.
Mm-hmm.
But Bastien, so the way I try to pronounce people's names is I just apologize and say I don't know. But Bastien Bouillon, who played the main rival, the soldier, he's very young, and his makeup was crazy throughout the movie. I totally bought him as middle-aged later on in the movie.
Yeah, that was one where I was like, oh, is this what he... I thought that what the age that he looked in the second half was closer to the age that he's actually at, because it's that good.
You should look at his photo on Wikipedia. He's a child.
Is he really? That's funny.
Yeah, he was great too. That role is tough. In the 1975 version, that role is played by Tony Curtis, who was pretty past his prime at that point and kind of checked out from being an actor. So it was cool to see someone who is in the spring of their career and actually giving it their all.
Yeah, the whole cast, there's not really a performance I feel like I can point to and go, that one wasn't quite up to par. Like everyone's feels like they're batting 1,000 in this movie,
Yeah.
you know? Like the son, this is how bad I am. I can't remember literally any characters' names. But like that scene where, when he goes and gives that very impassioned speech to
Haiti.
Haiti, yes, thank you. I was like, go off, man. You're killing this. He's great there. And yeah, every scene with Mercedes, I was like completely just enthralled by her performance. But the prosecutor was probably one of my favorite, probably my favorite supporting performance. He is like commands that screen, you know? He's got that stern pout with the mustache, and I'm like, this guy's killing it.
My favorite scene in the movie is the haunted house retelling of the crime scene.
Incredible.
So cool. And the woman who plays the woman who gets traded, Victoria, right? That's her name.
Mm-hmm.
Victoria.
Yeah.
She was so great. You could see her like breaking down throughout the whole thing. Or I kind of feel like, because that was the first version of it I saw, I'm like, oh, is this where he plays his hand too much? And the prosecutor starts to figure out what's going on. But that's not what the movie is. The movie is like straight up, these guys are dumb. They're all going to get screwed now.
That scene, you know, as someone who, and you're just like me, I didn't know the story beforehand. When he starts doing that, I'm like, oh no, this must be, because I didn't even realize what the runtime was. This movie is so perfectly paced that it could have ended there and I wouldn't have batted an eye. Like that whole movie feels to me like 2 hours. It's 3. So by that point I was like, I don't know where we're at. We could be at 3 hours. Who knows? And I was like, maybe this is the big finale. No, it's this like extremely tight. The editing it's so well written and edited, and that scene in particular, where you just feel this like tension and the way they're cutting back and forth to all these shots. And every time that they would cut to, and I think where the direction does a really good job of letting you know that he's not overplaying his hand, is the way in which it never feels like it transitions from De Villefort, I think is his name, the mustache rolling guy, back to Victoria. Yeah. It always goes from someone who knows the story to someone who doesn't know the story. And their like mouth is all agape and they're just like so blown away by what you're watching. So that it never feels like, oh, they're catching on, or everyone's seeming to kind of like piece together that he knows it. It's like this person is like suspicious. This person's blown away. Then that's someone who's suspicious, you know, like I just, that whole scene is great. I was surprised that they didn't play more off of Haiti being behind that mirror.
Oh,
like I thought that she was gonna like hit a wall, like kind of do something like, you know, a little haunted mansion action for that dinner.
I think it was to just sort of compare the time because she hid behind a mirror when Fernand, the main rival, she watched him kill her father while hiding behind a wall also. So I think it was just to create that parallel. I didn't clock that she was hiding in the mansion.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I've only seen it once. So there's that.
Yeah, I was like, oh, is she going to be like when it shows her, he's saying something to the effect of like that he was, that he heard like a sound, like he heard like crying and banging. And I was like, oh, she's going to be like, oh, you know, hitting the walls or something.
I guess not. It's funny, per her character. So I read the Wikipedia. I'm not going to read the Count of Monte Cristo. I read the Wikipedia synopsis of the book. Edward. What the hell is the main character's name now?
Edmund Dantes.
Yes, Dantes. Yeah. Oh my God.
I was like one guy whose name I remembered.
I watched the first 10 minutes of the first sound film so this movie's been adapted 50 times, like 25 times on film, 25 times on television.
Jeez.
And
yeah, we got 2 adaptations just last year.
Right. I didn't look at what the TV adaptation was like, but anyway, I was watching the first sound film and then thought, I've seen this enough. They're calling him Dantes the whole time. They just like can't give a shit so they can get the pronunciation right. In the book, it ends with Edward ending up with Haiti. I haven't seen an adaptation that ends that way. And it's like the best change they could have possibly made is to not have him run away. I can't believe that it
happens in the book.
Yeah. I mean, you can't? A French book from the 1800s?
Well, it seems like it's so much like the thesis of the story. And it's probably because I've only seen this one version.
Right.
But it very seems so much like the thesis of this story is that revenge is the thing that destroys you. You can choose life or you can choose revenge. The movie says, I mean, obviously we're talking about this movie, but like this movie says that like 4 different times. In the end, he chooses like his life over getting like that revenge. And so it's so interesting that they're like, and then he gets his revenge and then he gets love.
Right.
Like when it feels like revenge is the thing you must choose, and you throw everything else away in service of achieving that.
So it's interesting because in this version, he lets Morcerf, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, live. I mean, he's messed up, but he lives. In the 2002, I'm spoiling all this. In the 2002 version, he kills Guy Ritchie. It's pretty gnarly. And in the 1975 version, Chamberlain does not kill Tony Curtis, and then he also does not end up with Mercedes. And in the 1975 version, Mercedes like really rips him apart in a speech at the end of the movie, and then goes off to be with Albert, who has enlisted in the military and is fighting in Africa now. So pretty different ending there. And like Haiti is barely in either of those movies. In fact, I don't think she's in the 2002 movie at all.
Oh wow!
But it is in fact, in both versions, the fake son character or the fake Italian prince character is either not there or really different. So he's not in the 2002 version at all. And
isn't he played by Henry Cavill in that movie?
No, that's Albert is played by Henry Cavill.
Oh,
and it is brain breaking to see and hear him be young. His voice is really high and he's small. So Cavill is on some kind of test now. I'm sure of it. He claims. I have
to imagine.
He claims he did all natural for Man of Steel, but having seen what he looked like in Count of Monte Cristo, I do not believe him. Allegedly.
Just speaking of the ending is like the one thing that I have an issue with. Really, in the entire movie, like that whole movie to me is like a 5-star movie. I just have like this tiniest little that the filmmakers, I can't remember their names. There's 2 of them. It's like Alexander something and another French name.
Well, here let's give them a little bit of credit.
Yeah, give them their flowers here.
This is gonna be rough, but Alexander de la Pataler and Matthew Delaporte.
Yes, they are excellent. This movie has all of the skill in my mind of something like I'm really reminded of Pride and Prejudice when I watched this 2005, which is a gorgeous movie. They're both taking place around similar time periods, and so that's, I'm sure, part of it. One thing that is apparent to me is that they really don't know how to direct action so much as they do this like sweeping gravitas and drama. The sword fight at the end of this movie is, I think, almost like comically bad. And I think intentionally so in terms of the choreography. It feels like all of this like really strongly directed, careful control like goes out the window during this sword fight for quick jump cuts, really odd like camera movement, and like really kind of like puzzling decisions. There's like an aerial shot where they're like not even in center frame when they're like kind of heading down the stairs a little bit before he kicks him off the edge and he falls over. And granted, it's like 90 seconds, but I'm like, every movie should end with a sword fight. Like every movie needs to end with a guy fighting another guy with an eye patch with swords. This movie does that, but I think that it kind of like drops the ball at the 1 yard line and kind of does that. That's like my one hang up.
So I think there's 2 things going on here. One, we live in a world with John Wick and just like that whole of like stuntmen crafting movies that care about action sequences, and even a movie I know you didn't like very much, but The Killing Game or Killer's Game.
Killer's Game,
because of the computer blood. But I thought that Drew McIntyre, who's another professional wrestler, had a really good fight scene with Dave Bautista.
I like that fight. Yeah.
That was pretty cool and ended in a cool way. And I think sort of like proved the thesis that McIntyre could be a fun action character actor. But that movie is made by stuntman, and we get a lot of cool fight scenes, even in like kind of shit movies. So by comparison, it's just obvious when there's no like second unit that's better at this doing it on the movie. And then 2 is, in every version I watched, I wanted this to be more of a swashbuckling movie, and it just isn't that story. So
in terms of the like choreography, I agree. My issue isn't so much with like, is the sword fight like awesome, and more of like the visual craft of that fight feels like 2 guys who don't really know how to direct action.
I'm sure
and
that's
like
the
know
case.
how to make and are like there's a lot of cuts usually in an action scene, and so like that like literally 90 seconds I'm just like, okay, all right.
I guess the other issue there too is, so in like I keep going back to these movies you haven't seen, but in the 75 version, there's scenes where Dante's is training. And so in that final scene, when he overpowers his rival, it makes sense, and it feels like a big culmination of the story, where he was, not a fighter to begin with. He knew the sea. That's the whole thing, right? The sea is his deal. He's covered in sailor tattoos, which I had to Google to be like, was that actually a thing? Sailor tattoos
like
on
massive
French
back tattoo. Yeah.
like stuff that guys in Brooklyn are wearing now on their shoulders or are on.
Yeah,
his
he had like
shoulders.
the little swallows.
Yep. So he was, he's a sailor guy, not a fighting guy. In the other movies, it's a much bigger deal that he starts out not the fighter that the eye patch is. He only has the eye patch in this version, and then overcomes him, and then still chooses not to kill him. That's a big deal. Although I think in the book he does kill him. But in this, there's no training montage for him learning how to fight. In fact, there's a whole big chunk of the story that I think was good to be cut out. It's already a 3-hour movie. Where after, and actually this was a part of the movie where I had a bit of a disconnect. He swims away from prison and then is just home immediately.
Oh yeah.
I was like, oh, did he live on the coast facing the prison?
I noticed that this time too.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, was he just like on Alcatraz?
Right.
How far away is that?
It's a little weird. In the book and in the other versions of the story, he's picked up by a pirate ship, and that's where he meets Jacobo, his, in this version, Frankenstein of a assistant. But in the other versions, he's played by like Luis Guzman in the 2002 version. And it is as out of place as it sounds.
That's funny. I almost imagined like Lance Reddick playing this role.
It would have made
like
sense.
An American version.
Yeah. That's the visual analog you would have to this guy. No, it's little Luis Guzman. I am your man.
That's really funny.
who he wins over by beating in a knife fight. It's pretty funny. Oh, and then like that becomes a whole thing where these pirates and him all like conspire together, and that's who the guys are that help him trick Albert in the alleyway. Here it's left much more up to your imagination, and it's like, well, he has all the money in the world. He could do whatever he wanted.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that like I never even thought about that. Like, oh, how can he beat? Like, he's not like a sword fighter. I've loved the scene where he's like, oh, do you like guns? And then he's like, why don't you take a shot? Like, let's see. And then he shoots like in the like target. And then he goes, let's change the target. And he shoots the chain.
Yeah.
To me, in my mind, I was like, okay, so this guy is like good with any weapon. I think I just like blindly, accepted that as like combat accuracy or combat skill. It's so interesting listening to you talk about the things that this movie changes from the other versions. Like him not having an eye patch feels like such a massive oversight.
He's like beautiful in the other versions. In fact, Guy Pearce. Guy Ritchie, that'd be a weird movie. Guy Pearce.
This guy can't act at all.
And in some cases direct. Guy Pearce is playing it like he's drunk the entire movie, and he's like kind of effete. It's a very, very different portrayal. And then Tony Curtis, I don't know if you've seen a lot of Tony Curtis movies, but he is just Tony Curtis in every movie. Even if he's playing a different nationality or a gangster, or in like Some Like It Hot, he's just, a dude playing the saxophone. He's just Tony Curtis. And in this, he's Tony Curtis, except now he swings a sword.
Interesting. Yeah, I love the portrayal of Monserf, or whatever his name is. He has this like raw stoicism to him where you're like, this guy is, eye patch and all, very imposing. And it does feel like he's the final boss of the movie, so to speak, the entire time. He doesn't say a whole lot. He's just kind of like in the scene, scowling behind his eye patch. And again, every villain should have an eye patch, because the eye patch just makes you look cooler and scarier. I think it works so well. And I loved when his eye patch came off. Yeah, and it's like, oh, there's his nasty eye, Yeah. It's very cool. But also without the eye patch, like you did mention that a lot of these other versions don't have Haiti in them. And that would make sense, because that's kind of like the thing that ties him really to Haiti's story, which is that like they took him in because his eye was messed up or whatever, or he got shrapnel or shot or something like that. Yeah, that really he is this like scumbag that was like hurt, but then they brought him in and helped him, and I love that character. I wanted to talk about him being in jail. The prison stuff, this is like one example of how much I love the way that this script and the editing work. And I mentioned at the kind of like the dinner that this movie says like, what is like the most important thing that you need to know at any given point, and that's just the thing that's going to be on your plate. I feel like this movie never weighs us down with too much exposition, and anytime we do get exposition, it feels very like character driven.
Yeah,
like especially the scene with Abi Faria telling him the story of the knights, that he's the last one, feels like passing of the torch, and it feels like this like father to son. And you know, when we get to where he's like laying on that bed and he's like, you are the, what does he say, like something effective like, you are my greatest like final achievement, or like you're the thing that was,
he's like, God sent you to me or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, it's like one final thing for me to do, and I've, you know, I appreciate you. And I love the stuff that happens in there. And the whole movie does that exact same thing where it's like, you know, back to the dinner. In the lead up to the dinner, thinking, oh man, I remember that dinner scene being really robust, like a very like meaty scene. I mean, if you had asked me, I would have said that there was like shots of them eating and them kind of like maybe like a montage of them kind of like having some chatter back and forth. It cuts right to the chase. We basically go from them being outside the house to Villefort mentioning that there had already been 2 previous courses of meat. You know, he's like, oh, we already had the pork and the lamb or something like that. And I'm like, holy cow, they just jump. Like, again, they are like, you don't need the fluff. This thing's 3 hours as it is. Like, we're going to let you know through just dialogue that they've been at this dinner now for an hour, and we're going to get right down to this ghost story. The script on this it's a long movie, but the script is very well done, very tight. And I'm not surprised because these guys, the directors, which I believe are also the writers.
They're not really the writers because it was written.
Well, like the original. Yeah, right. I mean, in terms of the screenplay.
Sure.
So like they adapted the screenplay.
Yeah.
They also adapted the Three Musketeers, part 1 and 2. Have you seen those? Was part 2. Yeah, this is like their third one.
Yeah.
So they did the Three Musketeers part 1, part 2, which I have also not seen.
Right.
But when I was piecing together information from the French Good Morning America, they showed the posters for Three Musketeers 1 and 2, and I was like, I was aware of them, and I was like, oh, these are those same guys. I have to go and see these now, because if they're anything close to this, that's amazing.
Can you imagine if they weren't? They're like, yeah, we did this one Dumas adaptation. It was incredible. And then we dogged it on the ones that got us the third job. It doesn't
kind
really
of a bummer.
I'm curious what you think about, I love everything you had to say about the prison. The funny thing is, the only thing that I felt was handled better at all in any other version that I watched was, of course, it was by Richard Harris, who's incredible in everything. He has this really elated moment when he first finds Dantes, where he's like, oh, I can finally teach someone all this stuff I have in my head. And so you immediately get why he's so, even though he failed in escaping, you know, he's like, oh, that's 5 years wasted. He's immediately elated that someone else is there who's willing to hear everything he has, because he's a genius himself. I was wondering what you think about the scene where the fake Italian prince finally confronts his dad and then promptly gets his ass shot. That like really took the wind out of my sails and made me a little bit worried that the movie was about to spiral. It didn't, but I was like, oh, is this about to just like become it's all unraveling, it's not going to plan?
Let me ask before I answer, what was it about that scene where you're like, uh-oh?
It felt like up until that point, the directors had a really strong grasp on keeping me believing that this was all going to go smoothly until like the very end when something might go wrong. And to have something unhitched before that, I don't know why, but it just felt like this is happening at a time when he should still be flying through. And in the end, I got to thinking, okay, well, that was his first sign that like revenge corrupts, and once you get what you want, that's the end of you. And then also I think it might have just been a case of I felt bad for that kid and I wanted better things for him.
Yeah, I think that on second watch, it confirmed that I liked that scene because of, I think that it's saying a lot of what you're saying, that, you know, back to this kind of theme that the film has, life or revenge, and you can choose between the two. I think it's kind of like a precursor, a warning sign to Edmund which is it really is revenge or life. And in that moment, he chose revenge. And I think what really makes that part interesting is that for Edmund, he didn't need those guys to die. He wanted them to suffer.
Right.
And he's like, what do you say? Like, we're going to rip their hearts out because killing them's too easy. And had Albert gone along with, or is it
not Albert, but the other one,
the other guy.
Yeah.
Had that been enough for him, we'd be fine. But he wanted blood. I think that it's like a moment that shows that when you do choose revenge, life does not, like, you're not choosing life. And so I think that's where the final, him not killing Monsarf, I think is kind of in some ways a callback to it. But yeah, I did feel bad for him. I was like, come on, the guy, let the man get a shot in.
Yeah,
you know,
it didn't work out. It also kind of not this isn't a knock on that scene, but it felt very, I don't know, just kind of nihilistic after his aunt also dies because of her terrible life. That's an interesting adaptation too. That character is usually de Villefort's father. I mean, he doesn't end up being sold into prostitution by a gang. He's just killed. But I thought that was an interesting way to get another female character in the movie, which made it less like a Nolan movie because you don't see a lot of female characters in his films.
That is interesting. And I think that it's also probably a little bit more believable that a sister would save her nephew.
It's unrelated. So in the other adaptations, it's just like a random person who saves.
It's just the kid.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like he is taken out to be buried, and then just some random person saves him and sells him or gives him to the orphanage.
Oh, so how do they connect the dots?
Off screen.
Oh, really? In 2002, it's just like, and then we find out that
no. In 2002, that character doesn't exist. There's just that character's not in the movie, but in the book and in the 75 version, and I think in the miniseries, it's just like, he has all these spies everywhere, so he heard about it happening. It's also like, what a lucky coincidence for you that this guy did this after he screwed you.
Interesting. Yeah, everything that you're telling me just confirms that this is probably the best adaptation of this
it's like
book.
far and away. It's not
like it makes all the right changes from the book, and it makes all the right changes from the other movies. Because, in all fairness, this is like my first engagement with this story, so in my mind, this is like the initial version. But when I hear other things, I'm like, oh, well, that doesn't have the same like character impact that, my aunt, your sister, being the one that found me, and how that ties back to that life and revenge thing. Like, that's all so much more like rich than, hey, am I hearing some crying around here? Let me just dig up a baby.
That's what it was. If you now go back, and I think you should watch at least one of these, probably 2002, just because that's the most popular one. You're not going to be like, oh, it was because it was my first interaction with it that I think that one's better. You're going to say, no, this movie just kind of sucks.
It's like, oh, that this version really is like the best one.
Yeah, I'll tell you. This is the prime reason why this is the best one. Mm-hmm. Napoleon is in a lot of these other adaptations. Like, he's a character that shows up and they talk to him in the other versions.
Oh, really?
That is so unnecessary. He is so much more effective as like this looming danger, just like an inciting flashpoint for everyone else. Then when he shows up, you're like, oh, he's just like this little dude who's stuck on an island and some people want to get him off of there. It makes everything else feel so much more perfunctory to have him in the movie.
And there's something, we haven't even talked about the score, which the score of this movie is excellent, excellent, excellent. The way that the strings, like the deep strings hit, Daglar is looking over the note, and at the end it says Napoleon, and the rain's hitting it and the ink's kind of smudging, and it goes boom, and you're like, oh, this like monster, like you said, this like looming presence over the entire movie. Like, I recognize the name Napoleon. That told me everything I needed to know about what is going on with, and obviously you have like the little title cards at the beginning saying what's going on, but that just punctuated it to where I go, oh yeah, Napoleon is like this like monster under the bed that no one wants to like be associated with, and yet the association that Angèle has with him is the thing that is kind of like the inciting, like you said, incident of this movie. I can't imagine Napoleon showing up and he's like, little man with his hand in his shirt,
It's exactly what happens. They're fighting on Elba because the captain is sick. Now this is like in the original story. The captain's sick. That's why they go to Elba. But the captain wants to go to Elba because he's a Napoleon partisan. And they're fighting, and it looks like Caviezel's about to die. And all of a sudden, he falls, and it pans up, and it's exactly what you said. Napoleon with his hand behind his back. It's absurd.
Wow, so many great choices.
Yeah.
Here.